Good.
Fantastic. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm genuinely excited for this conversation. Creative strategy is no doubt one of the most exciting disciplines in marketing right now, and we've seen a huge shift. In the past 5 years, performance marketing used to be won through targeting and media buying, and today it seems creative has become the biggest lever for growth. At the same time, AI has transformed creative workflows. Meta's changed how ads are being served, and businesses are investing more and more in content than ever before. So that is all true, but yet creative strategy remains one of the least defined roles that we recruit for. And so I just thought it was important that we all come together and we create some sort of understanding of what is driving commercial performance, how can the best people set themselves apart from the competition. I think there's something there about knowing your audience inside out and how platforms and algorithms are shaping content, but I'll be excited to unpack that. And this just feels like a pivotal moment as the discipline's still evolving, which means the people entering the industry at this point have a real opportunity to shape what great looks like over the coming decade. So today we're going to explore what that means and how the journey is anything but linear, but what candidates and hiring managers can do to stay ahead of the curve. If anyone doesn't know me, I'm Yasmin. I head up all of our creative and design recruitment at 3Search, and 3Search specialise in go-to-market recruitment. So we hire talent across all core commercial functions that drive companies' growth and success. We've got offices in the UK and the US, and my little satellite office in the south of France. And yeah, we've got a front row seat, I suppose, to how roles like creative strategy are evolving and what the best companies are looking for. So yes, as I mentioned, I've seen the demand for creative strategists absolutely explode, but I've also seen how difficult these roles are to define and to hire. So hopefully I can bring a unique perspective to today's discussion. I probably speak to more creative strategists and hiring managers in a week than most of you speak to all year. So there we go. That's the value add I hope to bring. Emily, it'd be lovely if you could tell everyone who you are and where you come from.
For sure. Very excited to be here. I am Emily. I have spent the last 2 years heading up the creative strategy department at an agency called Aura Ads. So I've been responsible for overseeing 25 plus D2C clients with creative strategists making over 1,000 ads a month. So I've had very much a front row seat in the acceleration of creative strategy as a discipline in sort of the D2C space over the last 2 years. And before that, I've spent 8 years in a squiggly marketing career in advertising agencies, which really hopefully just defines how squiggly the role towards creative strategy can be. So that was a big training, probably 4 years in performance marketing. So I was trained in media buying, programmatic, Meta, Google, TikTok, PPC, YouTube, anything you can bid on. Before moving to a creative agency where I spent 4 or 5 years working my way up as a strategy and comms director, working on global 360 above the line campaigns all the way through to lower funnel, pitching for global brands. And really, I jumped to a creative agency when no one was really doing that in the space. So we're talking sort of 5-6 years ago. If you were a performance person, you stuck in your performance lane. And if you're a creative person, you stuck in your creative lane. So the move was a little bit wild for me when it happened. But obviously, in retrospect now, it actually makes complete sense as all of these roles start to reconverge, and skill stacking really is the ethos of creative strategy as a discipline, and there is no blueprint because of the way that this role encompasses so many different marketing disciplines. So I've had my own squiggly career towards that, and hopefully I can shed some light on what that's like in terms of entering the space, but also leading and managing in the space as well.
Amazing. And I guess that reference to a squiggly line career is probably quite a good place to start. So creative strategy is one of the most sought after roles in growth marketing currently, and yet the roadmap to hiring them is still relatively hard to define. As you said, there is no blueprint. And what's interesting from my perspective is every hiring manager seems to define it slightly differently. And the strongest candidates, in inverted commas, can often come from completely different backgrounds. So if there isn't one blueprint, what do you think actually defines and makes a great creative strategist?
The million dollar question, that one is. So start as we mean to go on. I'd like to just start by saying that actually it's really hard to define because the role is really, really hard. And I don't know how many of you are creative strategists in this room, but it is not an easy role because it encompasses so many different disciplines into one person in a way that is unprecedented in marketing, sort of in my last sort of 8 years in the industry particularly. And I know, Yaz, you feel that when it comes to the hiring market as well. So it's really, really hard. And everyone has a different idea of what creative strategy means, depending on what kind of brand you're speaking to, what kind of agency you're speaking to. So it's not linear and it is hard to define. Based on my experience of hiring a creative strategy team, I'm going to keep this sort of quite broad, based on whether you're looking at sort of entering the space or whether you're already in it. But I would say probably the strongest skill set is attitude. And I know that sounds broad, but it really is, like curiosity for the space, being really comfortable and excited by there being no right answer, a willingness to go into new territories. If you're a real creative, being willing and curious to deep dive into data for the first time, for instance, being sort of buzzed by the idea that this role is constantly changing and you might always feel a little bit on the back foot. There's constantly more to learn, constantly more to do. You have to sort of love that and be really interested, ask the right questions, and be sort of fueled by that energy. And that's partly because most of creative strategy is about failing, I would say. So you can expect 2 out of 10 creatives maybe to be a winner in an ad account in any one week. And therefore, you have to be sort of energized by the idea that your ads are failing, your ideas didn't land, and being willing to ask the question, why is that? What can I learn from this? How can I do better next time? How can I strive for more? And not feel sort of disheartened if you're going through a patch of, creating losers, etc. You have to be quite energized by that cycle of failure and test and learn, and not everybody is. So I would say attitude and that proactiveness is really important. The ability to multitask is huge because you're sort of switching between so many disciplines, often in the same day, is really important. And I would also say there are baseline skills that you need, right? So you have to have some fundamental understanding of media buying and a willingness to understand and be interested by data. You have to understand the algorithm changes, the ever-changing algorithm, and how that affects your creative. You have to have an understanding of consumer psychology. And then, you have to be interested in that sort of commercial growth and data. Ultimately, creative strategy largely sits in the growth team, not the brand team. So those commercials, those like profitability metrics are so important for when it comes to looking at success. And you have to be sort of interested in that as opposed to just the creative ideation in its own right, because you can't really have one without the other in this space, based on the sort of objectives that creative strategists are being put under within a brand or a company.
Absolutely. And I guess as well, just from my perspective, I think, because there is no definition, and it typically comes down to, and when I've looked at it and broken it down, I think, how can you have the same title and such a different idea of what good looks like? And I kid you not, I have literally, we work exclusively with a lot of our clients, but our relationships with candidates is, if the candidate's great for a role, we're not going to not send them to a job. We want to help as many people as possible. We could literally be sending the same shortlist of people to the same jobs, and some will land and some won't. And that's really hard to kind of drill down into the detail. But I do think it comes down to a lot around hiring manager experience, like what's their background, what's their kind of strong suit versus what's the gap they're trying to fill, how sophisticated the existing team is. And that reporting line does seem to dictate quite a lot the type of profile, whether or not they're coming up from a more creative background or whether or not they're coming up from a more paid media, paid social background. And I think neither is right or wrong. I think it's very hard to know ahead of time whether or not you would be a great fit for somewhere until you sort of unpacked the foundation of what they already have in place. And I also think it's around definition as well. And hopefully the value we can bring is sort of probing and pushing back on certain expectations when someone's asking for everything in the kitchen sink, trying to figure out what's the actual major skills gap and non-negotiable versus like, yes, of course, we'd love someone that can do absolutely everything. But the reality is you might have to compromise in some areas. So trying, I guess, to sort of advocate best for people working in this space and navigating it, because it is complex.
It is complex, and I think, all job specs in this space want unicorns, right? But the discipline is so new. As someone who's done a lot of creative strategy interviews, you do have to start looking for those broader characteristics of attitude, of curiosity, of proactiveness, of maturity, and understand what discipline is the most important to have in the building, and then what is super coachable based on someone's willingness to learn. Willingness to self-learn and proactiveness, and understand, how you as a manager or you as a leader can cultivate those other skills. So for instance, the likes of Soar With Us, which is a big agency within the space, they're actually building their own creative strategist accelerator as a bit of a program and an entry-level program, because they recognize that getting all of those skills ready, cooked and ready to go is actually really hard. And I think you'll see more of that as the discipline starts to evolve. Like, actually, how can you have junior roles and how can you shape creative strategy skill sets by drawing on those sort of other disciplines and then making a pathway to coach the rest of it, right? So it really does depend on the size and scale of a company and whether or not they have the resource to do that. Not everyone will. Someone will want a unicorn because they only have one person and one set budget where they have to achieve all of this, and that's where it can get quite complex and competitive, etc. But I think you will see more of the Soar With Us model, where you can take, you're great at this, you're great at that, and actually how does a business sort of coach you through defining some of those additional skills. And I think that's why the fact that there isn't a blueprint yet is quite exciting for anyone in the room who wants to enter into creative strategy, because it's sort of all to play for, if you like. If you've got a marketing discipline and you've got a superpower there, but you might feel stuck in that discipline. Maybe there's not so much growth. Maybe you're a designer who has been distracted a little bit by AI and there isn't a career path there. Well, actually, if you can sort of harness what you're really good at and apply it to the space, there's loads of tools now, CapCut, Higgsfields, etc., where you can sort of create your own portfolio without having to be working live on a brand. If you can do that, then there's a level playing field and there's sort of loads to go after in this sort of discipline, which does draw on so many different areas where you can have a really high earning potential in a way that you might not if you were stuck in your singular discipline. So if you can take that and be excited by it rather than scared by it, I think that with the knowledge of hiring managers, knowing that you can't get every single skill in one person, but you have the right attitude and the right willingness to learn, then there's loads of opportunity to be really great at this and to have a really interesting career.
And do you think, in terms of advice for people who are trying to position themselves when there isn't one obvious route, do you think, understanding where your strengths lie, is that the key to unlocking success and being able to articulate that?
Oh, 100%. And that's what I would look for in interviews, right? Can someone have the self-reflection and the maturity to say, look, I am great at this thing. This thing is my superpower. I've got loads of experience in it, but I'm really interested in XYZ. I've upskilled in the space. I'm tapped into the industry. I've dabbled in XYZ, and I'm really interested to learn and throw myself into it. And that sort of attitude and coachability is almost more important in terms of how I've hired, as to whether or not you come from a performance background or an organic background, for instance. As long as you've got that superpower, you can articulate it and show how your experience all knits together. And then defining your own niche around that is probably where you're going to see the most success. So for instance, with my example, I have a background in performance and growth. I made a jump and I got trained in pure strategy, comms planning, client leadership, pitching, commercial sort of acumen. And that's given me a really good platform to lead a team. We're using commercial and leadership experience to look at the bigger picture because of my 360 marketing experience. I'm not a video editing expert. I don't have loads of experience running shoots. And if you're working with a smaller brand in-house, sometimes the creative strategist will have to put shoots together, etc. That's not my background. I've worked in agencies all my life. We've got teams for that. And that's okay. I wouldn't profess to be excellent in that skill. And that's not what I can bring to the table based on my years of experience and how I've got to where I've got to. So as long as you can articulate that as a narrative, and do it with confidence and a willingness to learn and to continue to upskill, I think that's where you're going to see those standout candidates come through. And I don't know if that's what you're seeing as on your end when it comes to sort of understanding and having confidence in your strengths, and equally where your gaps are when it comes to speaking to those companies. Is that a conversation that hiring managers are willing to have? You know, like, this person has this skill but not this skill, that's something that we can work with. What's been the sort of communication with it?
I think it depends. I think, not to toot our own horn, but I think with any recruitment, sometimes it's about having the right advocate. And I think sometimes, especially in a very saturated market, it can be hard to self-promote when you're feeling a little bit disparaged maybe by your experience. So I think having someone who can really articulate those strengths on your behalf, but also push back and say, granted, they don't have the entire spectrum of what you're looking for, but when I spoke to them, they were really ambitious, and they do all of this shooting and editing in their spare time, and I think that could transition to a professional setting really nicely. Like, I think it's about, if you don't have someone like me doing that for you, you need to get very good at doing it for yourself, and also be hyper curious, be testing and using these tools, figuring out these new technologies, trying to think about how you can set yourself apart from your competitors. And it goes back to all that, what you said about attitude. You know, I think typically creative strategists have to wear a lot of hats. It's that conundrum between left brain, right brain, and how that's why we call it unicorn hiring, because ultimately you have to be able to be super creative and conceptual and, you know, make everyone's world come alive with all of the ideas you're coming up with. But you also have to be able to talk to growth and performance marketing leaders and talk in metrics and numbers and data. And I think that's a really hard balance to strike. Inevitably, as I always say to hiring folk, it will fall one way or the other. So you've got to figure out what's the major skills lean you're lacking. Obviously, we understand within a performance marketing arena, you've got to get data, but is the bigger gap on the conceptual creative ideation, or is it on that dialogue with growth and being able to speak their language? And I think, yeah, maybe that's a good question you can ask if you're in a process where it feels a little bit ill-defined, and you don't feel like the kind of understanding is coming back at you.
And both exist, right? Like, you can be a creative strategist who really skews towards performance, and you'll have in-house teams or even agencies that really value that skill set or need it more so. Maybe they've got a more robust creative team, for instance, and you can learn that bit on the job, but actually they're hiring you for that growth experience, then great. And then the same can be true the other way around, right? Like, you can have amazing creative experience, and that's what a team wants to hire you for. They've got the growth bit covered. You just need to get comfortable with working with a media buyer, but you don't have to be involved in it. In which case, those creative skills and the demonstration of that creative skills will get you hired. So both can be true. And I think, again, it goes back to being able to articulate what your superpowers are, and then also not be discouraged if you're not right for one brand. That might just be looking for that slightly different hierarchy of skills, and that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite funny, isn't it? Maybe that leads us on to the next topic we were going to discuss, but who is actually deciding what good looks like? I think that's quite an interesting thing. It's certainly not me, and it doesn't appear to be you. But if, you know, performance teams increasingly want kind of creative that learns quickly and tests rapidly and drives results. But brand teams, understandably, they want consistency and craft and long-term brand equity. I would imagine creative strategists often find themselves right in the middle of that dance. So how do you balance work that performs today, but also protects the brand of tomorrow?
I love this question. And honestly, if I had £1 for every time someone from the brand team for one of our clients got involved in the amends process, I would be rich. And it definitely causes a lot of headaches when it comes to pipeline amends, you know, output, because brand teams often have a very different idea of what things should look like and how things should perform versus the reality of creative strategy at the moment. So it's an interesting dance. Particularly if you're working in-house and you're straddling both teams, there's a lot of stakeholder management there to excel at, I suppose. And I think if you take this all the way back to sort of marketing fundamentals, it does help with this. So you talked about long-term brand building and equity and brand teams versus sort of growth and that sort of short-term profitability and results. It's not the creative strategist's job to balance that brand versus performance piece alone, right? It's not their job. Long-term growth still needs proper 360 strategy. So podcast, radio, TV, out of home, experiential, all of these sort of wider upper funnel channels play a role in the marketing mix for that long-term brand growth and for that sort of brand distinctiveness. And it's, growth and creative strategy and performance is a piece of that, but it isn't the whole pie. So if you're sort of sparring with brand teams who are being very specific on brand guidelines, colors, sort of consistency of assets, it's worth remembering sort of maybe how the brand grew up, or who was trained in the brand team, and in sort of what era of marketing. So if you're working with a more seasoned marketeer, for instance, in the brand team, they've probably grown up in a world where they've been taught about matching luggage. So brand distinctiveness, or mental availability comes from sort of consistent assets that are served to audiences over time. So they're distinct, but they're consistent. There's matching luggage across channels, and there's an element of cross-channel frequency there where the whole brand world sort of aligns in multimedia touch points. So that is still true to an element when it comes to sort of that long-term brand growth, mental availability, brand awareness. And that's what, if you're in a supermarket looking at 100 shampoos, and you're making a decision on what shampoo to buy, and that's where you're going to pick one brand over the other, right? That consistent, distinctive assets over time builds mental availability. Great. Social doesn't work that way anymore. It used to back in the day, but not so much now. So your landscape is more fragmented. The volume is so much bigger. The buying triggers are more instant than ever before. So, with Andromeda, that distinctiveness is rewarded, but only if it's also diverse. So that sort of strict consistency is penalized by the algorithm these days. And that's why, variations and brand consistency doesn't work so much anymore. So it is the job of the strategist to have these conversations and understand, what the successive growth levers are on the lower funnel, and then what brand consistency can do sort of on the upper funnel. And you can't get diverse and distinct assets at volume on social without loosening those brand guidelines and loosening sort of those strict brand look and feels, for instance. So that's going to have to be a conversation with teams. It's a two-way street. There might be some non-negotiables, but actually you need to start speaking to the brand team about what actually drives performance. So spacing, font, consistent matching luggage isn't going to perform, but there are things that will impact brand equity in lower funnel. So message, the actual concept, the actual sort of construction of your creative ideas, for instance, your audience. So it's really being clear on, what the levers are for brand and long term, and then actually what social and lower funnel is there to do. And, both things can be true, but it's not the creative strategist's job to balance that long-term brand equity alone. I feel quite passionate about this, having sat on both sides of things.
I can tell. I'm curious, do you think UGC's made the tension even greater?
Yes, because it's much more difficult to have control over brand distinctiveness and branding in UGC. And you're in a world where we have so much UGC now, it can become a bit of a sort of endless scroll of same. So it has complicated things, but that doesn't mean that you can't get sort of, your brand look and feel and your distinctiveness through UGC. You just have to be more choiceful with it. So for Who Gives a Crap, for instance, which we've worked with a lot for a long time, they have a very clear idea on who sort of encompasses the brand. So you think, colourful bathrooms, colourful clothes, are really outrageous and fun personality, confident personality. There are sort of these key levers that really make a great UGC piece of content for the Who Gives a Crap audience, for instance. So there are sort of guidelines with who the creator managers will go after in order to engage in a piece of creative content. And if something crushes and something really works, then we'll do more of that, and we might do more of it with that one creator. And then we'll try to replicate that with other creators. But, those colourful bathrooms, the personality, the joy that encompasses the brand all come through in the choice of those creators. And that's where the eye of the creator manager is really important as well, with making sure that that creator just feels like the brand, looks like the brand, encompasses the audience that the brand is trying to go after. But it's more of an art to it, because those sort of brand distinctiveness pieces are much less distinct.
Do you think that, I mean, you've probably crossed this bridge before, but like more lo-fi creative can still build very premium brands? Like, I mean, I guess given the way content is consumed these days, one would argue it has to.
And that's where you've got your balance between sort of 360 marketing, upper funnel and lower funnel as well. So both will play a part. You can have a really premium brand identity that lives, you know, across channels, and you can afford to play in a more lower fi, more native space with your paid ads or with your UGC, for instance. And that is what's actually working on the channel, because it's more relatable. It feels like someone like you. It feels more trustworthy. So that can still sort of exist in the same space, as long as you have both and you get the balance right of the aesthetic or the level of premium of your brand across other marketing channels. So as long as you don't forget one and make sure you invest in the other, then both those things can be true. And there's also a layer of, you know, UGC isn't, you know, one monolith. You can have layers of lo-fi UGC, and then you can have UGC that does feel more premium, again, based on the creator that you're choosing, or the level of experience of that creator can bring that sort of premium feel into UGC, even though it's in a lo-fi format.
Moving slightly on, I guess let's address the elephant in the room. Obviously, two huge shifts have happened in the last couple of years. Meta's Andromeda, which I will absolutely leave you to explain over and above myself, but it's completely changed how creative is served, tested, optimized at scale. It's it's unprecedented, truly. At the same time, you've got generative AI, which has, I suppose, democratized production in some senses. Almost anyone can now generate a script or a visual or a concept in minutes. I see lots of candidates use this during task stages. I think it's really smart, you know, shows that you're intrigued and interested in technological advances, but also it saves you time and you're not giving too much of yourself. And, you know, it's smart. But then that obviously will change the day-to-day of a creative strategist's life. I'd love it if you can give us a quick overview of the advent of Andromeda and maybe unpack some of your thoughts around what's that changed for creative strategists as 2026 continues.
Yeah, it's definitely been a buzzword of late, and it only really fully rolled out in October 2025. So, you know, it's fairly new in the grand scheme of things and of Meta. So Andromeda being Meta's ad delivery system, and it's the algorithm that chooses who sees certain ads, for instance, if anyone doesn't know, and it's replaced sort of audience-based targeting. So back in the day when I trained, tactics and targeting used to be the bread and butter of media buying. Interest, demographics, pixels, lookalikes. That was more important than your creative. Obviously, we don't live in that world at all anymore. And broad targeting has become sort of ubiquitous with Andromeda, and creative-based targeting obviously being the new bread and butter. So the algorithm is reading the actual elements in your content like never before, which means the anatomy of your ad and each sort of element, from the hook to the visual composition to the audience call out, etc., is doing so much more heavy lifting than the sort of media buying itself, for instance. So in terms of what that's meant in the day-to-day of making ads and creative strategy, in my experience, is, you know, volume is always, over the last 2 years, has always been part of the spiel, but it's like never before now. So that volume is key, and it's been a lot harder because sort of identical ad variations don't work the way they used to. So variations where you would do creative testing on one headline versus another headline, but with the same sort of visual composition of an ad, used to be a really good way of understanding, you know, what messaging worked, for instance. And it also used to be a really good way of getting a lot of ads into an ad account without huge heavy lifting. But that doesn't work as well anymore. It has its place when it comes to sort of variables, but ultimately distinct creative is what gets its own shot in the auction, and then any duplication is just competing against itself for the same slot. So it's being categorized in the same entity ID, and Meta is reading that as the exact same creative. So it's not giving you a good read on whether or not one ad is better than another ad at that level, because Meta just sees it as the same ad. So I think it was Dara Denny that coined this, but we used to say a lot in-house, does this concept, or do these ads pass the squint test? So if you sort of squint at a lot of static ads, do they all look the same, or do they look diverse enough that Meta will say, okay, these are completely distinct ads that I'm going to serve to different audience and put in different auctions? And that's ultimately how you're going to get scale and how you're going to get your creative across as much, broad audience and different audiences as possible. Because you're not able to define that via media buying targeting anymore, you have to have that sort of distinct layer within each of the concepts or ideas you're putting out. So it means that you need more content. It needs to be more precise than ever before. You need to have less variants that don't look the same. Again, consistency isn't going to get you any favors with the algorithm. And it also means creative fatigue is sped up as well. So we've seen that over the last sort of year. I've seen ads perform well for a shorter amount of time before they fatigue. So basically Andromeda has sort of exhausted the well-matched users for that ad, and it wants a new one. So it's hungry. It's a hungry beast. And then it means you can't sort of ride out on a unicorn ad that's just going to continually get you an efficient CPA for 8 weeks. It's going to have a much shorter shelf life, and therefore you need new content to replace it. And so it goes on, and so it goes on. So it means it's harder, it's busier, burnout is quite prevalent because you have to have more ideas. Production is quicker because you need to get more ads into the account. Testing cycles are therefore quicker. So it has put the team and creative strategists under more pressure, I would say. But I would also say, as you say, from AI, that's why AI is accelerated so much in the space, because you need it to keep up with that pace and demand of the platforms, for instance. So AI you can't really keep up unless you're wielding AI. So there's no point fighting it. You need it. And I think in the next 6 months, you'll probably see the majority of statics and short motion ads being completely generated by AI tools. So Nano Banana, 11 Labs, Higgsfield, loads of these are already being utilized across agencies. And I think everyone's sort of scrabbling to make sure those AI processes are structured enough to keep up with production demands and speed up those cycles. So rather than waiting a week for designers to put together some ads, right, the likes of Higgsfield will do that automatically as AI sort of permeates design and that kind of thing. So what does that mean? It means that probably we can create even more content even more quickly. But then it's the job of the strategist to actually be that sort of sniper and not the machine gun, and actually think, okay, you can make more content, but that doesn't mean you always should. And you certainly shouldn't make more content without understanding why you're making it, what you'll learn, what you're building on. And that's why I like that sniper machine gun analogy. How can you be a sniper in that sort of sea of content and make really important in your audience and understand that less is more?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like AI gets a pretty hard rap. I feel it's tough, right? Because especially I recruit across creative and design, and obviously it's massively impacting workflows across both disciplines. But what do you think, which aspects of the workflow do you think it's improved or made a creative strategist easier to demonstrate their superpowers, as you call it?
So I would acknowledge that we're still probably in the messy middle, where everyone's saying we need to use AI, and leaders are trying to, put AI into workflows, but they're also learning. So we're all using it without necessarily having mastered it yet. And sometimes it means you can be sparring with AI and arguing with it for an output. And actually it would take you less time just to use your brain and do it yourself. So there is an element of push and pull there in terms of whether or not it helps or hinders. That will dissipate, I think, in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, where companies really get their AI stack and their AI systems settled. At the moment, it's very test, learn. Does this speed up? Does this make us more efficient? Does this actually slow us down? X, Y, Z. So there's a bit of that going on. But from my experience and from creative strategy point of view, that sort of upfront work, so competitor research, customer research, audience research, category research, AI has done huge heavy lifting there in a way that it never used to. So social listening is sort of instant now. You can plug in your CSV customer review files. You can ask Claude Cowork to scrape competitor ad libraries and give you reports. You can sync Claude with Motion Analytics, which is a big creative analytics tool in the space, for sort of that automated reporting, trend analysis. You can ask it to take that data and break down the anatomy of winning ads and winning scripts that actually scale to create more of them. And you can sort of train your models per brand, for instance. So you've got amassed all of these information of a brand, of what works and what doesn't, in a space that you can have an intelligent sparring match with your AI for a quicker output. So when it comes to the day-to-day nuts and bolts of strategy, analysis, and data, it can really help with speeding up how you get smart on a new brand if you're working with agency, and how you actually take data and use it meaningfully without having to sit there and crunch lots and lots of data points all the time. So it can be a huge help. Again, it's about knowing what good looks like at the end of it. So your inputs need to be good, and you need to understand what good looks like from an output perspective. And then it can be brilliant. And I think once teams settle with how they're utilizing AI in intelligently, I suppose, then that messy middle of actually feeling like this is taking you longer will start to dissipate, because we've definitely felt that. I'm sure everyone has in teams at the moment. So still lots to do with it, but as I said, I don't think you can be a creative strategist in this space without embracing the benefits of AI, because you just can't utilize that level of volume and thinking you need without it.
But I think that it sounds like what you're saying throughout is, that human judgment, taste, oversight, whatever you call it, is the real difference maker. And that will almost become more valuable than just kind of executing at pace. And when we know that the tech can do that for us, taste and judgment will make all the difference.
100%. You've got there's two things, right? There's your experience as a marketeer, wherever squiggly career has got you there. You have innate sort of experience to draw on that, isn't replaceable by a machine, because, marketing is about marketing to humans at the end of the day. So that's where your taste comes from, I suppose. And then you've got, that deep audience understanding, your ability to get into the mindset of the audience you're trying to target, and to question what you're getting through an AI. Does it hit the human insights? Has AI flattened the language or the emotion or the nuance that you're trying to convey? Would you as a human stop scrolling? And you've got to remember that AI often has bias, right? It does tell you what you want to hear. So you still need to interrogate or spar with it. And you need to draw on those sort of unique experience of the disciplines that, you've built in your career, to have that sort of taste and to keep building on that through reading and being immersed in online culture, speaking to people, understanding traditional marketing tactics. All of that jazz is going to be what sort of pulls everything together and set you apart, I suppose, in a world where AI can write a script, but that doesn't mean it's as good as it can be on that first output. And that's where that experience comes in.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if we think about technology, innovation, it's touching every industry. So obviously we know creative strategy is still in its relative infancy comparative to some other much better established marketing disciplines. How can everyone on this call future-proof themselves in a discipline that is still being invented? And I saw this incredible stat where it said, someone had quoted, that in the next 5 years, they believe that every D2C business will employ a dedicated creative strat or content creator. And furthermore, that the best of those will probably create more commercial value than almost anyone else in the business, which is wild when you think about it. So if that's true, what skills should people invest in today to become the people businesses just simply cannot afford not to hire? And I guess that speaks to your own personal experience and what you'd look out for as a hiring manager.
Yeah, for sure. I think, from a creative strategist perspective, I think it's important to remember, as we've talked about all of these disciplines being rolled into one person, it is your job to be a conductor of the orchestra, not the expert in every single instrument. So the creative strategists, particularly in brand teams, when they sit between in-house teams, where they sit between brand teams and growth teams, again, there's a lot of conducting that needs to happen there, and you need to know and need to to know a bit about each discipline and enough about each discipline to be able to delegate, to be able to strike a narrative, to be able to push forward a strategic direction. And I think if you can take that away and think, okay, I need to become proficient in a lot of these areas, but actually my job is to have the ability to collaborate with teams and build a strategic direction for the business that I'm working with. And you need to be able to think commercially and understand, what is your break-even CAC? What are the business cogs? What does it mean to make a profit on social when you take into account those business cogs? What's the efficiency that you need to reach? And how do I get the most out of creative team, the brand team, the growth team, all these stakeholders, the creator team, to reach that direction? And that is your job, really, is to conduct all of those things. And it means you don't necessarily have to be the expert, but you do need to understand enough to work with the experts to delegate and to drive that forward. So I think if anyone feels, unconfident with not being, a media buyer, whatever it might be, hopefully you can take that away and think differently about how you frame yourself as a creative strategist in a business. And I think those people will set themselves apart going forward. And then from a creator perspective, I think that's a really interesting point. And I do think that creators as part of businesses, either with a creative strategist or without a creative strategist, will become a lot more common. You're already seeing this with lots of D2C brands. Surreal, the D2C cereal brand, are great at this. They have some great in-house creators. You're also seeing founders act as creators in their own right across businesses, because founder content always crushes. And so that sort of in-house creator model is gaining ground. And I think it's really interesting. From a skill set perspective there, even if you're not a creator in your own right, or you're not looking to be a content creator for a brand, having a go at UGC and making content yourself is going to make you better at your job, either better at working with creators, or it's going to put you in a good place if you're working with a small brand, an in-house brand where lots of people wear different hats when it comes to production. So even if it's just picking up a product in your house and sort of writing a script and putting together a UGC video, editing it on CapCut, you can make a ready-made portfolio doing that if you're looking to start in the space and to sort of gain some skills. Or you can join a UGC platform like Twirl and get some, get paid for it, get some experience. It will make you better at briefing. It will make you better at clarifying visual hooks and transitions and understanding sort of creator limitations when they receive a brief. You'll be looking at a brief like a creator as opposed to just a strategist, and it will help you gain confidence in just sort of whacking up a rough cut, particularly if you're in-house, and getting content sort of from ideation to production stage straight out the door. So I would say that will be a huge win and something that everyone can do. I'm doing it. I'm doing some UGC content at the moment. It's not part of my day-to-day job, but again, if you're a strategist, you sort of have to keep dipping your toe into all of these skill sets. And I would also get familiar with AI static generation. So there's loads of YouTube videos on how to use Higgsfield and Nano Banana and that kind of stuff. Motion just did a boot camp on it. If you can just be proficient at being able to flash up some UGC, some statics that you've made with AI, either for ideation purposes or for, a first round of creative, then you're going to be ahead of the game of most people in the space at the moment. And I think that's going to be huge in the next 6 to 12 months as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, lean into the skills of those around you, I'd imagine. I know how the gap is sort of closing between design and motion graphics and social content and creative strats. And I just think that there's a way to knowledge share and maybe kind of hand over some of that so that you can upskill in one arena whilst also just generally making the business operate more efficiently.
100%. There's so much collaboration involved in this sort of pipeline anyway. Make friends with your design team, share the knowledge. You can pass on performance or data. They can pass on knowledge on how actually a concept is creative. If you've seen a wicked motion design that's doing the rounds for brands on 4Play, for instance, and you're like, oh, can we do that? Can we not do that? What does it entail? Ask, have a conversation about it, riff on, what can be done, and you'll be a better briefer when it comes to motion design or static, whatever, if you understand how these things get made as well in the interim. And then similarly, the design team can learn off you when it comes to those sort of performance levers that are really important, that they're in the brief for a reason. Please make sure you execute them on them XYZ. So skills sharing, I think, is the aim of the game. And again, just being curious to have a go. And I know it's easier said than done sometimes when you're so busy. But there's loads of resources out there these days on how you can sort of just be proficient enough to understand what you're talking about. Again, you don't have to be the expert, but you do need to know enough to sort of conduct that orchestra around you.
I mean, it sounds like anyone who's landed on being a creative strategist, yourself included, it was not a linear path to get there. Probably never grew up dreaming of being a creative strategist. I always joke when people ask me about my career, I'm like, no one ever dreams of being a recruiter, do they? But there are certain skills and things you pick up along your way and you're like, oh, I think I'd be quite good at that. If you were starting your career again today, where would you spend the next kind of 12 months focusing your time and attention?
Oh, I would dabble in content creation, either with UGC or just organic content. To understand editing and hooks, visual
there
hooks.
There is some value then to organic and how that intersects, because I think as well that's a bit of a resistance point, sorry to interrupt you, but around hiring, where people often say it's all organic, rather than bridging into that performance arena where you're obviously much more accountable to metrics and driving growth.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends where you're putting value on skill sets, but at the end of the day, you can look at any thought leader in the space and they'll tell you that actually the best ideas and the best concepts will come from organic. What's actually going viral in the space of a conversation or an audience or a product on organic TikTok, for instance, whether that's a trend, whether that's a hook, for instance, you have to be tapped into that. And actually that's often the best content that performs on paid. And it means that, you're starting with a piece of content or the structure or the bones of a piece of content that you already know an audience engaged with. Obviously, there are skills there to be able to put your sort of performance hat on and be able to understand, how that script will evolve to get those USPs in, to make sure that you're leading with a psychological trigger, whatever it might be. But having a basis in organic from a creative and ideation perspective, particularly, super important, I'd say, for the next sort of phase of creative strategy. So yeah, there's that, dabbling in UGC content creation. And then I would say fundamentals. I still think marketing, sort of pure marketing theory, is still really important for everything that we're talking about here, particularly, as I said earlier, if you're trying to navigate conversations around long-term versus short-term growth, or even when things aren't going very well in ad accounts, drawing on sort of traditional marketing theory is a really great sort of confidence and understanding layer that I don't think we should throw away. So, Blue Ocean Strategy is a great book. The Choice Factory is a great book. How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp is a great book. And then, of course, you've got your strategic fundamentals like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, levels of balance, all of that sort of psychological piece, really important. So there's your two spectrums, I suppose. It's the UGC and the AI, they're sort of doing the practical piece, and then it's the theory alongside that, and how you can make sure you sort of boosting your marketing knowledge so that you can have that confidence as a marketeer as well, because we're still marketeers at the end of the day. And those skills are important.
No, I agree. I've had an interesting question come through. Thank you, David. If AI can already synthesize more research than any strategist could realistically consume, where do you think human strategic value begins?
Oh, that is a
really put you on the spot there. That is a great
$1 million question. Again, I think it comes, I know everyone's bandying around this idea of taste. I think it's still really important. Yes, AI can synthesize all that research and it can crunch so much data. As a strategist, you still need to understand where the value lies in that. Like, what's the human insight? What's the tension? And how does that formulate into a really insightful or emotional piece of content? And the taste and your experience, your ability to, be in online culture, not just sort of observing, but in it, reading widely, like building up your your sort of gravitas as a strategist is still really important in that. AI can do the heavy lifting, the crunching, the synthesizing, the brand research, etc. But you're still on the hook of taking all of that and having a point of view and having a sharp insight. And, you know, AI can give you that to a certain extent, but you still need to wield the ultimate output there with a human eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do feel free to put any final questions in the chat. I'm conscious of time. We've got a few pre-submitted questions as well. Oh, here comes another one. Do you think there will be jobs for the creative designers, brand, graphic, motion, magazine, poster designers in the future? I hate the fact that AI has been introduced because everything looks repetitive. Thank you, Alexandra.
I do think there will still be a place for that. I think that sort of creative eye is still super important to make sure that it doesn't all become homogenous, for instance. I just think it will be higher leverage work. So instead of being on the ground, actually, you know, in Adobe or whatever, creating that piece of content, the creatives and the designers will actually be sort of overseeing the brand world, you know, making those final high quality decisions on what the output is. They just won't be doing necessarily the hands-on keyboards work as intensely as they're doing now. We're also, I think, you know, still a little bit away from that when it comes to static and motion. I think we'll be quicker off the bat to be AI-ified, if you like, but more complex edits, longer videos, mashups, storytelling, all of that will still need that sort of design eye and those design capabilities and understanding, you know, motion, storyboarding, etc. I just think it will be less hands-on keyboard eventually, and hopefully a really good opportunity to, yeah, get out of doing the repetitive work and doing more of the brain work.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a few pre-submitted questions, so I might just rattle through a couple of those as we've got time, but please do put anything into the chat if you'd like. We've got a few minutes left. I'm curious about burnout, which you have mentioned, and I know, well, certainly to what I'm hearing is you have to be all things to all people and be great at everything. I mean, that's got to be a huge challenge for the discipline and those operating within it. Would you agree? Yeah. And if so, what do you do about it?
It is a problem because of that sort of volume piece that I talked about and the competing demands, etc. I think, and this, it's easy for me to say, but it does come with experience a little bit to be able to have boundaries and understand your limitations and having the confidence to have those conversations with your employer if burnout does hit or if the workload is too high for what you can achieve. The reality is, you know, a strategist can, you know, ideate, concept, brief, launch ads, shoot content, whatever, in a given week, but the output they'll be able to achieve by doing all of those things by themselves is much lower. So actually it becomes a conversation with your employer, you know, I can do all of these things, but it means my output is going to be limited by X amount. If volume and velocity is important to us as a team, how can we improve the resource available in order to achieve that at scale? And have a conversation about, you know, because sometimes brands are hiring creative strategists without a real understanding of the intensity of it, right? So there's a level of knowing your limitations, understanding what resource you need to reach a certain output or volume that a brand requires based on spend, for instance, having those conversations. And I think when those AI systems settle and there are more systems in place and a brand like understands their sort of production pipeline and how AI can plug into that, that will alleviate a little bit. But again, part of it is knowing your limitations, being confident to have those conversations about resource. The other part of it, I think, for hiring managers and for teams working in this space will be to, you know, probably, Yasmin, as part of your conversations with brands, understanding the limitations of one person in a given week and the level of responsibility on individual people and how to share that load accordingly. So I don't think we've got it right. You're always going to have those competing demands at the moment, but I think as the discipline settles and the AI and the structure settles, because at the moment teams don't have the structure in place to deliver this level of ads, right? And then the strategists going like this, trying to keep up with it all, and it's not sustainable. So once you get to a point where it's teams are more sophisticated about how they're deploying that, I think we'll settle. But at the moment, I think, unfortunately, it is more on the creative strategist to be able to understand the limitations and have those conversations with teams and employers about what resource can be weighted.
And the kind of, like we talked about earlier, advocating for yourself. If you have someone like me doing it on your behalf, great. But if not, you've got to advocate for yourself. And it goes both ways. I've seen content production specs where they're sort of expecting the person who's going to be doing all of the output to also do all of the overarching strategy and liaise with growth. And again, it's about an education piece around where does the role distinction lie, and what's the best genetic makeup for that specific team in order to get the best out of everything and everyone.
Yeah, and that's where the understanding of, you know, business goals and commercials is really important. So you can play back to a team, look, we're only spending X amount on social a week based on our results and based on, you know, our velocity at the moment. We do not need that amount of content. We're actually better off prioritizing strategy, our creative, you know, testing roadmap, doing less but doing it well, because actually our ad account doesn't need that right now. And being able to have the language to have those conversations, I think, does come with time, but it is sort of part of the skill set and the ammunition that you can bring to the space once you've got that baseline experience.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. This has been such an insightful conversation. And Emily, thank you to you for sharing all of your experience and insights. I will be doing something further with this community as it continues to grow, and just appreciate you all spending time with us. And I will hopefully see you at another in-person event very soon. But yeah, key takeaway, I think, is that whilst obviously technology will continue to evolve, the value is shifting massively away from execution and hugely towards judgment. And that's the value add you can bring, taste, judgment, whatever you want to call it. You know, it is an emerging discipline, but that makes it exciting. So we can sort of write the rule book as we go. And I'm certainly enjoying helping people navigate that intersection of ideas and questions. So thank you all for coming. There will be some write-up on this and so on. But Emily, thank you for your time. And so looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Amazing. Thanks so much, guys.
Lovely to see you all. Bye-bye.